want to say a little bit about the late great Joe Bugner. I think it's fair to say he was one of our greatest heavyweights. He died on my 40th birthday a few days ago, 1st of September. Um, and this is the obituary in the Times. I was actually looking at Boxing News because they usually do a special edition when a prominent fighter has passed away. They haven't done that yet. They were actually focusing on the Frank Bruno Oliver McCall fight 30 years on, but wouldn't be surprised if they do it for next week. Anyway, this is the obituary in the Times. The photo there is of the first fight with Muhammad Ali in 1973 in Las Vegas. Bugner fought Ali twice. He fought him again in 1975 in Kuala Lumpur, and both men struggled with the heat in that fight. Ali won both fights, but in the first fight, he famously, or notably, praised Bugner and actually said that he had a great future. Ali dominated the fights, but Bugner was the only Briton at that time who was seen as being able to go the distance with Ali, and he did. And there were several points in the fight it looked like he might have hurt Ali. Um, with Joe Bugner, one gets the impression he always fell slightly short of his full potential, and that was a criticism in the second bout with Ali that he just didn't push hard enough. Um, there is an argument that Bugner actually might be so underestimated that he could even be seen as our second greatest heavyweight after Lennox Lewis. I'm not sure that I would go that far. I'm not sure I put him above Tyson Fury or Anthony Joshua, but certainly he would be among our best, easily in the top 10 British heavyweights of all time. Bob Fitzsimmons is held in high regard, but Fitzsimmons, although born in Cornwall, had all of his fights in New Zealand and Australia, and I believe became a naturalised New Zealander. In a similar way, Bugner moved to Australia in 1986 because he was fed up of the treatment of the press here. I always felt with the Bugner story it was a case of a fighter who was never fully appreciated. His family moved from Hungary. He was born in Hungary in 1950, and his family moved when he was just 6 from the Soviet oppression of 1956, along with 200,000 other Hungarians. But he was never fully accepted in this country, I feel, because he made the mistake of beating the much loved Henry Cooper. Now, I've actually got Cooper's autobiography here. I've never read it yet, but it'll be interesting to see how Cooper addresses the Bugner controversy. Apparently, the referee in that bout needed protection. The fans behaved in an appalling way. They threw pennies at the ring and crisp packets, and it was a big outrage. It was kind of a bit. It reminds me a bit of like those guys like Timothy Bradley who beat Pacquiao. Um, when a fighter beats a very popular adversary, rightly or wrongly on the decision, they're never going to get respect for it. It's one of those things in boxing. I think boxing fans can be very fickle, especially in this country. And Britain, like Mexico, has a very rich boxing tradition. So, fans get very passionate. But I always felt the way that Bugner was treated by the fans in that fight with Henry Cooper was very unpleasant. I mean, this is a young guy. He was 21 at the time. He made the mistake of beating the very popular Cooper, and, instead of getting credit for it, he was reviled. I believe he's lost his next fight with Jack Bodell, and it's almost like people just wanted to see him lose. I just feel that a young guy, he should have been at the top of his top of the world, and he just wasn't allowed to enjoy it. Um, I think later on he did get a bit more public support, but never quite. He just never seemed to get the same reverence as Cooper, as Frank Bruno later on, as Ricky Hatton, as other British fighters who were very popular. But Ali praising Bugner reminds me a bit of Joe Lewis praising the Welsh contender Tommy Farr. And Lewis famously said he's no bum of the month because that was a derogatory nickname that the press gave to Joe Lewis's opponents. In fact, in the first Bugner-Ali fight, one of the commentators, in fact it might have been Hart Cosell, said he's the best Briton since Tommy Farr, so that was still within memory at that point. Um, Bugner had a colourful life. You know, he did achieve a lot in the ring, and he actually won several versions of world and European titles. Um, his last one, I think, was in a little regarded title. Let me just get this right because I wasn't actually aware of this. His last fight with Levi Billups in 1999, I think at that point he actually had the. Just bear with me, I'll go back to the write up here. Incidentally, the referee in the Cooper fight apparently fell out with Cooper and ended up suing Cooper for a piece in this autobiography. So it'll be interesting to read up on that. Where are we here? Yeah, his last fight with Levi Billups, at that point he had actually. Nah, I can't find it. Never mind. He fell out with Russell Crowe because he was an advisor on the set of Cinderella Man, and apparently him and Russell Crowe had ego clashes. He also was on I'm a Celebrity, Get Me Out of Here. Joe Cooper wasn't above a bit of vanity himself, I think it's fair to say. But why not? He achieved a lot. He was sometimes nicknamed the Harmless Hercules because the press believed he didn't fulfill his full potential. He had a great physique. One thing I didn't realise about Bugner was how big he was, 6'4". I mean, I knew he was a big guy, but I didn't think, that's more like the heavyweights of today. In the 70s, heavyweights were generally smaller. If you look at Joe Frazier, Muhammad Ali and others, they weren't massive. Even George Foreman, who was big for the time, was not the sort of giants of, we see in the Klitschko brothers or Fury, Joshua. In fact, Alexander Usyk, today seen as a relatively small heavyweight, would be a normal heavyweight by 70s standards. I think him and Ali have are a similar size. Bugner also fought Joe Frazier. He fought Ernie Shavers. So, he fought all the big names of that golden era of heavyweight boxing. And for that reason, I think he should be held in high regard in Britain. He left, like I say, in 1986, as the Times puts it. After his showdown with the greatest in Kuala Lumpur, Bugner became increasingly frustrated with the hostility of the British press. In his later years in the ring, he was nicknamed Aussie Joe, finding a warmer reception in Australia than they ever had in Britain, which he always put down to his controversial win over Cooper. I wish I'd never had that fight, he once said. I won, but I lost everything. I was hated for it, never allowed to forget it, and eventually was hounded out of the country I love. The harmless Hercules perhaps did not reach the heights he might have done in the sport, but he could still point to a remarkable record: 83 fights, 69 wins, 43 knockouts. I think he could just as much be seen as an Australian fighter as a British fighter. And he actually, I've just seen a clip of him in an interview on an Australian talk show where he mentioned that he's the only Australian undisputed titleist, heavyweight titleist. I don't know if that's actually accurate, but I wouldn't be surprised. Bugner was hard as nails, durable. I think he had real skills. But again, he never quite reached his full potential. I think I compare him to guys like, probably be slightly above George Chuvalo, but that sort of toughness just reminds me of that. Maybe Ken Norton, those guys who held in high regard but never quite seemed to be fully respected. What else can be said about Bugner? Like I say, he became a bit of a celebrity. He ventured into the wine business. It didn't work. Like a lot of fighters, he fell in financial hard times and had to get back into the ring. Very long career, 1967 to 1999. And in his last years, he'd been suffering from dementia. He passed away in his Brisbane care home, I believe. How will Joe Bugner be remembered? I think certainly one of our best contenders ever. I'm not sure if I'd rank him as high as our second greatest heavyweight, but certainly top 10, probably top 5. I mean, for me it would be at this point Lennox Lewis, Tyson Fury, Anthony Joshua, Joe Bugner, Henry Cooper, then maybe Frank Bruno, Tommy Farr, Herbie Hyde, Dillian White. Gets a bit difficult after that. But I've no problem with Bugner. I mean, I'm not going to argue too hard against him being ranked second. I think the criticism of Fury and Joshua is whilst they've had big achievements, they've both sort of let down the fans recently. A, because they haven't fought each other, and B, because they've both been beaten by Usyk. And Fury keeps running his mouth. He's doing himself no favours. I think if Fury and Joshua are to redeem themselves, they need to fight. But isn't going to happen. And they could procrastinate for so long that there's no longer a public interest. And that will deprive the British public of the biggest domestic fight we've ever had, heavyweight fight. Um, it would be bigger than Lewis Bruno. And yet, are we going to see it? It looks unlikely at this point. Um, I mentioned the 6'4" thing. Another interesting thing about Joe Bugner, apparently in that first Ali fight, Ali had been given a robe by Elvis Presley. And Bugner liked it, and he asked the king if he could have one as well. But he asked him politely. Apparently Presley was rude to Bugner. He said, "You ain't no champ." And Bugner apparently used colourful language in response. And Elvis's entourage said, "You can't speak to the king like that." And Bugner, to be fair, stood his ground. He wasn't going to be pushed around by anyone. Remember, Elvis had played a boxer, whereas Bugner was a boxer. I don't know if Elvis could have handled himself in the ring. Maybe he could have, but I doubt he would have taken on Joe Bugner. Anyway, yeah, that's how he should be remembered. One of our greatest heavyweights. I'm sure there's more to say, but I'll leave it there for now. It's just unfortunate that he didn't get the reception he should have. I think that mentality, that faculty of boxing fans to punish a young fighter for no other reason than doing his job and beating Cooper, it's even if the decision was controversial, it's not Joe Bugner that made the decision. It's something that annoys me about boxing fans, how fickle they can be. But yeah, rest in peace, Joe Bugner. Aussie Joe.